Hello everyone, in this video we're going to build a complete authentication system with the PERN stack. That's PostgreSQL, Express, React and Node.js. We will set up user registration and login, store passwords securely with bcrypt, generate GVT tokens and handle authentication using httpOnly cookies. We will also use Postman to test our API endpoints and pgAdmin to manage our database. By the end, you will have a full login and registration flow where users can sign up, log in, and stay authenticated across pages. So let's get started. Okay, so let's create two folders, backend and frontend. And now let's open our terminal and go to the backend folder. And now we need to initialize a Node.js application. For that, we need to say npm init -y. When we say -y, it means that we want to accept the default settings. So now, as you can see, we have our file, which is package.json. Great. So now we need to install the following packages. So let's say that we want to install Express. It's a framework to create routes and handle requests. Then PG. It's a PostgreSQL client to connect with our database. Then bcrypt.js to hash and compare passwords securely. JSON Web Token to generate and verify GVT tokens. Cookie-parser to read GVT from cookies. And finally .env to manage environment variables. So now let's press enter and install them, and we should see them right here. So as you can see, here we have our dependencies, and also we see node models folder and package-log.json file. Great. And also we can install one more dependency. So let's say npm install, but we want to install it as a dev dependency. Okay, so we need it since it restarts server automatically on changes. So let's also install it. So as you can see, here we have our dev dependencies object, and inside we have nodemon. Also, to be able to use ES6 syntax, I want to change this type by module. Okay, and now in the root we can create our file, which will be server.js. And now I can say import Express from Express. Great. So let's close our terminal and let's create an instance of an Express application by saying const app will be equal to Express. Then let's say that in the root we want to show the following message. But before, we need to have request and response objects. So request is what comes to us from a client, and response is how we respond to that request. So when someone visits the root path of our application, we want to show this text. So let's say that our application will listen on port, which will be 5000, okay? And in the console, we can show that server is running on port 5000. Great. Now let's clear our terminal, and to be able to start our application, I suggest changing our scripts. So let's say that here we want to have a script which will be called start, and it will be equal to node server.js. And let's also change that here we want to have server.js instead of index.js. So since server.js and package.json are on the same level, we can say that when we gonna write npm start, this command will run. But for now, we want to deal with development, so we can have one more script for development. And in this case, we want to use our nodemon, which we have installed. Okay, and also we need to provide the name of our server file. So now let's first of all save this file, and let's start our application by saying npm run dev. So as you can see, it says that server is running on port 5000. So let's check it. So as you can see, here we have our message. That is great. Okay, so now what I suggest to do is to create a database and a table using pgAdmin. So pgAdmin is a graphical tool for managing PostgreSQL databases. It lets us create databases and tables without writing all commands manually. But anyway, some of our commands will be written manually. Okay, so let's open servers, and as you can see, here we have PostgreSQL 17 and we have our databases. So let's right-click databases, then create, then database, and we need to give it a name. I want to say PERN _ auth. So as you can see, we have it, and owner can be left as default. So let's click save. And as you can see, we have our database. So now we need to create a table. So let's right-click PERN auth, then let's say query tool. And when it comes to creating a table, I want to write it manually. So for our project, we only need one table. Okay, so let's say create table. Then we need to give it a name. Let's say users. Great. Then we need to define what kind of fields we want to have in our table. Of course, it should be ID, and let's say serial primary key. So by writing ID serial primary key, we make sure that this line is responsible for auto-incrementing user ID. So serial is a special data type in PostgreSQL that automatically generates a number for each new row, like an auto-incrementing ID in this case. And primary key means this column uniquely identifies each row in the table. So there will be no duplicates. Okay, then let's say that we want to have a name, and let's say that it will be varchar 100, and it shouldn't be null, so we say not null. So we basically say that the name's length shouldn't be more than 100. Then we also want to have email, and it should be varchar also 100, and at the same time it has to be unique field, and also it shouldn't be null. So when it comes to email, of course it has to be unique, but when it comes for the name, it doesn't necessarily have to be unique. Okay, and we also say that it shouldn't be null. Then we want to have password field, and it will be varchar 255. So it means that our password shouldn't be longer than 255 characters. So the length shouldn't be more than 255 characters, and also it shouldn't be null. Then we also want to know when a certain user was created. So for that we can create a field called created_at, and for that we can use a special data type which is called timestamp default current _ timestamp. So default current timestamp means if you don't manually provide a value, PostgreSQL will automatically fill in the current date and time when a new row is created. So that's it for our table. So to be able to create it, let's click this button to execute this script. And as you can see, query returned successfully. To be able to see it, let's open schemas, then public, and then here we have tables. And as you can see, we have our users. And if we open columns, as you can see, we have 5 columns, as you can see. So that is great. Okay, and what I suggest to do next is to create a .env file. So let's create it inside backend folder in the root. So let's say .env. And our .env file will store our environment variables like database credentials and secret keys. So this way we don't hard code them into the project, and it's easier to change between local and production environments. So first of all, let's say that we want to have a variable for a port, and the value will be 5000. So as you can see, inside server.js, we have it to be hard coded. But very soon, we want to get it from this .env file, okay? Then let's create a variable for database host, and it will be localhost. Then for database port, let's say that database port, and by default, In my case, it is 5432. And for our user, it is also Postgres. So how can you know? You can know it when you just install pgAdmin, okay? Then you will be asked to provide username, password, and default port. So when I installed pgAdmin, I just followed the default settings, and that's why I have the following values like Postgres 54 and 32 and so on. And of course, here we shouldn't forget to provide our database name, which is in our case, as you remember, PERN _auth. And then we need to provide our database password. So let's say password. And in this case, it is also Postgres. Again, you take these values when you install pgAdmin. Then we need to have GVT secret, of course. But for the sake of this tutorial, I will just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. But of course, when you deal with some real projects, you need to provide a very strong and long GVT secret. And our final variable, which will be client URL, and in this case, it will be 5173. Great, so let's save this file. Okay, and now what I suggest to do next is that to be able to connect to our database inside the backend folder, we need to create a new folder called config, and inside, let's create a file called db.js. So to be able to connect to our database, first of all, let's import pool class. So let's say import pool from pg library. So it will import pool class from pg to connect Node.js with PostgreSQL. Then let's import .env from .env, and it will import .env to load environment variables. And we need to say .env.config. And if we hover over, as you can see, it loads .env file contents into process.env by default. Great. Then let's say const pool will be equal to new pool. And here we need to provide our data. So for host, we need to get access to our process.env, and we need to provide the variable. And for other parts, we need to do the same. So by doing const pool equal to new pool, we create a new connection. We create a new connection pool. So it is basically a group of reusable database connections, so our app can handle multiple requests efficiently. So after that, let's say that we want to have pool.on and on connect listener. So if everything is successful in the console, we can show connected to the database. So pool.onConnect, this is an event listener that runs whenever a new connection to the database is successfully established. Okay, so if we manage to connect to our database, we should see this text. Then pool.onError. This is another event listener triggered when the pool detects an unexpected error with the database connection. And for the sake of this tutorial, we can remove this process.exit -1 when our server stops immediately. So for the sake of this tutorial, we can remove it, okay? And when it comes to this text, we can just say database error. Okay, so now let's just say export default pool, so that it will export pool so we can use it in other files. So that's it. Let's save this file. I think that everything is clear to you. Okay, and what I suggest to do next is to make some changes to our server.js file. So under this import, let's also import .env from .env. As I said, we needed to read .env variables. And let's also import cookie-parser from cookie-parser. We need it to handle cookies. Now let's say that we want to say .env.config, since it loads .env file contents into process.env. Then we need to use some middlewares. So we need to use Express.js middleware to parse JSON request bodies. Then we need to use cookie-parser middleware to parse cookies from requests. And as you remember, I said that we're gonna change this hard-coded value. So let's say that we want to create a variable called port, and it will be equal to process.env.port or 5000. In case of some errors, we're gonna use 5000. And now let's use this variable here. And we also need to change it right here. So it means that we need to use backticks here. Great. So let's save this file. Okay guys, and now at this point, what I suggest to do next is that inside backend folder, let's create a new folder called routes, and inside let's create a file called auth.js, and here we're gonna define our routes. So first of all, let's import Express from Express. Then we need to import bcrypt from bcrypt.js to hash passwords. Then let's import JWT from JSON Web Token to create authentication tokens. And let's also import pool from config.db.js. So by doing this, we import our database connection. Okay. Then let's say const router will be equal to express.router. So it will create a router for our auth routes. Then since we're gonna work with cookies, we need to set cookie options, and we need it for security. So let's say const cookie options, and here we need to set our options. So first of all, httpOnly has to be true. It means that cookie cannot be accessed by JavaScript on the client. Then let's say secure, and it will be equal to process.env.node.env production. So what it means is that it only sends cookies over HTTPS in production. Okay. Then same site to be strict means that it will prevent CSRF attacks. And when it comes to max age, we can say that it will be for 30 days. So let's say 30 multiplied by 24 multiplied by 60 multiplied by 60 again, and multiplied by 1000. So it will be 30 days. It means that cookie will expire in 30 days. Okay, so now we have set our options, and at this point we can create a function to generate JWT token. So let's say generate token, and it's gonna accept an ID. Then we need to say return JWT.sign method, and of course it has to use this incoming ID, and then it has to sign it using our secret, which is JWT_secret. And then we need to say when this token should expire, and as we have said, it's gonna expire in 30 days. So what this function does is that it signs token with user ID. Okay, and now let's create the register endpoint. Let's say that it will be router.post method. The endpoint will be register, and the function will be asynchronous. It's gonna have request and response objects. Okay, then we need to destructure username, email, and password from request.body. So that's why inside server.js file we used this express.json middleware. So by doing this, now we can get access to this data from request.body. Okay, so we get form data. Then we need to check if username, email, or password aren't provided. If at least one of these isn't provided, we can return response with status code 400, and in the JSON, in the message, we can say please provide all required fields. Then if they are provided, we need to check if a user exists. So we need to say user exists, and it will be equal to await. Then we use our connection, our database connection, and we use this query. So it means that we want to select everything from users where email is equal to this email. So in this case, as you can see, $1 is used like a placeholder, and email is the actual value which will be used inside of this placeholder. So for example, it will be like select everything from users where email is equal to, for example, john@gmail.com. Okay, so by doing this, we check if user exists. So in a nutshell, we need to use this placeholder to keep the query safe and dynamic. Okay, then if user really exists, So how can we know if user really exists? We can know it by saying user exists.rows.length. If it is more than 0, then we can return this error by saying user already exists. And here we check user exists.rows.length. It is because pool.query returns an object with a rows array containing all matched records. So that's why we check for length. Okay, so if a user exists, we throw this error. But if this user doesn't exist yet, we need to hash his password first of all. So for that, we can say that we want to use our bcrypt library and the hash method. Then we want to hash the plain password that comes to us from form data. So here it is. And we provide 10. So here the 10 is the salt rounds. It tells bcrypt how many times to process the password, making the hash stronger and harder to crack. Okay, so now we have our hashed password and we can create our user. For that, let's say const new user will be equal to await pool.query. And here we can say that we want to use insert into our users table. Then we provide the columns names, which are username, email, and password. When it comes to values, we use these placeholders, and username will be for this, email will be for this, and hashed password will be for this. Okay, then after the insert happens, we want to return the row, or we can return some parts of it. Like we can return only ID, then name, then email. Okay. Okay, so now we have our new user, and now we need to generate GVT for this new user. For that, we can say const token will be equal to generate token. And as you remember, I said that generate token is going to accept an ID. And as you can see, it is really true because we have our new user, then we get access to him by saying rows at 0, and we get his ID by saying .id. And then we just need to store this token in the cookie. So that's why we say response.cookie, then we say the name will be token, then we really provide the token, and we use our cookie options. So that's it. By doing this, we store token in cookie. Again, when it comes to this response.cookie, this part is an express function to set a cookie in the client's browser. Token, the name of the cookie. Here it stores the GVT token. Then the token, the value of the cookie. So in other words, it's the GVT generated for the user. And cookie options are additional settings, as you can see. Okay, so in a nutshell, this sets a cookie named token containing the GVT so the client can stay logged in securely. Okay, and then we can return response with status 201, meaning that everything went successfully. And we don't really need to return the token. We just need to return the data of the user. And by writing this, we return only the user's ID, name, and email to the frontend. The password is never sent, so it stays safe on the server. Because as you can see, here we return only ID, name, and email, so password isn't provided. And in the response, we also will not see the password and the time when this user was created. Okay, so we have created a route to be able to register. Great. Now let's create an endpoint to be able to log in. Okay, again, it will be post method. The endpoint will be login, request, and response. And when we log in, we only need email and password. Okay, then we need to check if email and password are provided. So if at least one of them isn't provided, we throw this error. Okay, then we need to find a user by his email. So for that, we can say const user will be equal to select from users where email matches this incoming email. If we manage to find a user, we will do something. If not, we will do something else. So if we can't find a user associated with this email, then we can see that this person who sent this form provided invalid credentials. So we can throw this error. But if we really manage to find a user, we need to say const user data will be equal to user.rows at 0. So it means that we will be able to get user record, which will include his personal data. Okay. Then of course we need to understand if this user's data, if this user's password, which is this. So we need to take this user's password, then we need to take this password from the form. So here it is from the form, and here it is the password of a user from our database. So we need to compare them. So if they don't match, we need to say if isMatch isn't true, we can return response with status code 400, and we can see invalid credentials since the passwords aren't equal to each other. But if passwords are equal to each other, we can generate a JVT token. So let's say const token will be equal to generate token function, and we pass user's ID there. And then again, we can store the token in cookie. And after a user logins, we can also show his data. So we can say response.json, and we can show his data. Okay, now we have created the route to be able to log in. Now we can create a route to get the data of the logged in user. Okay, so let's say me. So let's say router.get. And the thing is, it has to be protected because it is personal info, right? So we didn't create this protect middleware yet, but we're gonna do it very soon. I will remove it and leave it as it is. And then we just need to say response.json request.user. So we're gonna deal with it in protect middleware. And it means that using protect middleware, we can show the data of the logged in user. We can get access to it just by saying request.user, because in our protect middleware, we will implement the functionality so that we will be able to get access to the data of the logged in user just by saying request.user. Okay. So for now, I can just say that it will return info of the logged in user from middleware. We can see from protect middleware. So it will be clear for now. Then we can create the functionality to be able to log out. So it will be logout endpoint. And when it comes to this, it is very simple. Okay, the endpoint will be logout, and then we say response.cookie. So we override the token cookie with an empty string. And at the same time, we set max age to be 1 millisecond to effectively delete it. Okay, so we clear the token by setting it to an empty string with a very, very short expire. And then we can just show the message. Okay, so we set max age to be 1 to expire the cookie instantly, which logs out the user. So that's it for our routes. Now let's export default router to be able to use it in server.js. So let's save this file. Okay, and as you remember, I said that now we need to create middleware to protect this route. Okay, so for that, inside the backend folder, let's create a new folder called middleware. And inside this folder, let's create a new file called auth.js. And here let's import JVT from JSON Web Token to verify tokens. And let's import pull from config.db.js. So we import our database connection. Then let's create our function, which will be protect, and it will be synchronous. And here we have request object, response object, and next function. So next is a function that passes control to the next middleware or route handler. Okay, so now let's say that we want to have try and catch block. And if we face some error, we can show the error in the console and throw this error. And inside try block, let's say that we want to get access to the token from request.cookies.token. Then if there is no token, we can return this response by saying not authorized, no token. But if we really manage to find a token, we need to decode it. So that's why we need to say const decoded will be equal to gvt.verify method. So we take this token and at the same time we use our gvt secret. So we do verification and we assign the value of this to this variable which is decoded. Then using this decoded data, we need to find a user in our database. So let's say const user will be equal to await pull query. Then we just want to select ID, username and email from users where ID is equal to decoded.id. Okay, so we use decoded token ID to fetch the user. Then if we can't find a user, so we can just say for the consistency, we can say if users rows.length is equal to 0, we can return response with status code 401 and we can say not authorized, user not found. But then if we manage to find a user, we can say request.user to be equal to user.rows at 0. So we attach user info to the request object and then we can call next function to proceed to the next middleware or route handler. So as you can see here, we have request.user object, and then inside auth routes, that's why we can get access to it. So we can get access to the user data by saying request.user. As you remember, I mentioned it here. So that's it. So let's save this file. Okay, and now we can finally protect this route. So let's say protect, we need to import it. Great. So now this route is protected. So let's save it. Well, guys, I just remembered that we have name, not username in our database. So we need to make some changes. Okay, so here we need to have name, and I'm gonna do it very quickly. Okay, I have done it inside auth.js file. Now let's do it inside middleware, and here I need to change it only here, I guess, and that's it. Okay, now we need to make some changes inside our server.js file, and then we're gonna check our routes in Postman. So let's go to our server.js file and let's import course from course. So let's say import course from course to allow cross-origin requests. Then let's use course middleware here. Let's say app.use, then course. And when it comes to the origin, we can get access to it by saying client URL, or we can say that by default, it will be http://localhost and this port. And we say credentials to be true to enable cookies to be sent in requests. Now we can remove this testing route, and we actually need to use our real routes that we have created. So let's say app.use, then the path will be API/auth, and then after this path, we want to register our routes. So let's say auth routes, and let's import auth routes. So let's say import auth routes from .routes auth.js. So by doing this, we mount auth routes at API auth. It means that we'll be able to get access to the login route, for example, by saying /API/auth/login. And at the same time, we can use this path only after hitting the full path, which will be http://localhost:5000. Then we will have /API/auth, and then we will have the route that we need from this file. Okay, so that should be it for our backend. So let's save it. And now let's go to Postman and test our backend functionality. Okay, so now we are in Postman. Now let's click Create Collection and let's name it to be PERN-login-register. Okay, and now inside this collection, let's create a new request, and it will be for our registering. So the path will be http://localhost:5000/API/auth/register. Now let's go to body, raw, and now we need to provide name, let's say Mark, then we need to provide email. So let's say Mark gmail.com, and we need to provide password. For the password, I will just use this password. So let's click send. As you can see, we have an error. Well guys, the error is because we have an error cannot find package course. And if we go to package.json file, we really don't have that package. So let's install it. First of all, let's clear our terminal and let's install course. And now let's restart our server by saying npm run dev. Okay, now let's try it one more time in Postman. So let's click send. Now we have error 500. So we have the error which says that the column doesn't exist in the table. Well guys, I forgot to change the columns here. Okay, here I need to say name, of course. So now let's save this file. Let's open our terminal and server is running on port 5000. And let's click this button again. And as you can see, we have managed to create our user. Let's see it in pgAdmin. So to be able to see it in pgAdmin, let's say select everything from our users table. So let's click execute script. And as you can see, we have our user. We have his ID, name, email, hashed password, and the time when this user was created. Great. So let's rename this request to be register. Okay, and let's create one more user. I will say Oliver. Let's click this button again. And here it is. Now let's click execute script again. And as you can see, we have two users. Now let's create one more request and we want to test our login functionality. So let's go to body, then raw, and now let's say that we want to log in as Mark. So let's say Mark, and here let's say password and his password. So let's click send. And as you can see, we successfully managed to log in as Mark. That is really great. So let's rename this to be login and let's save this request. So that's it, guys. That's it for our testing in Postman, and that's it for our backend. Now we need to work with our frontend part. So let's do it. Okay, so now let's close the files that we don't need. Now we will be focused on our frontend. So let's open our terminal by pressing Ctrl and backtick. And now let's create a new terminal and let's go to the frontend folder and let's write npm create vite at latest and dot. So we write dot so that everything will be installed exactly inside this frontend folder without any additional folders. Let's choose React, then JavaScript. So it is asking for roll down Vite, and I'm gonna say no. And here I will also say no. And now let's write npm install. Great, now it's time to connect Tailwind CSS to our project, so let's do it. Here let's click get started, and we can skip the first part because we have already done it. Now let's copy this and paste it in our terminal. Okay, now we need to make some changes inside vite.config.js file. So let's copy this import, and inside vite.config.js file, let's also import Tailwind CSS, and inside plugins array, let's use it. So let's save this file, and we need to import Tailwind CSS to our CSS file that imports Tailwind CSS. So inside source folder, we can find a file called index.css. We can remove everything and paste our import Tailwind CSS. So let's save this file. Now let's delete app.css. We don't need it. And inside app.jsx, let's actually close this backend folder and let's close the terminal. So inside app.jsx, I'm going to remove this boilerplate code. Okay. And now inside index.html, instead of this default title, let's also say PERN auth. So let's save it. And now we need to install some more dependencies. So let's write npm install Axios. It is a library to make HTTP requests from the front end. And the next, will be React-Router-DOM. It handles navigation and routing between pages in a React app. So let's install them. Great. Now let's start our frontend by saying npm run dev. So let's open it. Great. Okay, that is great. Okay. Now we need to have some states in our app. So let's create them. We need to have a state for our user, and by default it will be null. And let's import useState from React. Then we need to have a state for an error. So let's say error, set error, and by default it will be an empty string. Then we need to have a state for loading. So let's say const loading, and by default it will be true. And then guys, as you remember, I said that we need to have routes. So to be able to work with it, let's say that we want to have router. So let's say router, and of course we need to import it from React Router DOM. So let's manually import it. So let's import browser router as router from React Router DOM. So browser router as router is a router component to handle single page application routing. Then we also need routes. It will be like a container for all route components. Then we need to have a route to define individual routes and navigate to be able to redirect to another route. Okay, so we have wrapped our application with router, and now we want to have our routes. So let's say routes, let's say routes, but above these routes we want to have our navbar component. So first of all, let's create it. So inside source folder we can create a new folder called components, and inside this folder let's create a file called navbar.jsx. Okay, so let's say that we want to have a navbar. Great. Then we want to have a home route. For that, we can say that the path will be root path and the element should be home component. And then also we will have register and login pages. So let's create them. So inside source folder, we can create a new folder called pages, and let's create home page. Then let's create login page. And let's also create register page. Okay, so now we can remove this h1 tag with the actual home component that we have just created. So let's import home component from pages home. Okay, also we need to have a route for our login page. So let's say route, and path will be login, and the element will be login page. Okay, and the same should be done for our register page. So let's import login page and register page. Okay, and as you can see here we have our navbar and the content of the home component. So now we need to understand if we have a user who is logged in or if we don't have a user who is logged in. So we need to be able to control that. So it means that we need to make a request to our backend. So for that, we can use a useEffect hook. So let's say useEffect hook, and we have imported it. Okay. And let's create a function called fetch user. And let's say that we want to have try and catch block. Let's say try and catch block. And inside, let's create a variable called response, or res in this case. It will be equal to await Axios. By the way, let's import Axios. So let's import Axios from Axios. Okay. So it will be equal to await Axios.get method. Then we need to provide our path, our correct path, which will be http://localhost:5000 API/auth/me. Let's say me. So we need it to get logged in user from backend. Then we want to say that we want to set user to the data of the response. Okay. And at the same time, we need to send cookies with every request to be able to identify a user. So we can say that here, we can say Axios.defaults with credentials to be true. So we don't want to manually say that with credentials will be true, but we can set it at the very top right here. So by doing this, it will send cookies with every request so that we will be able to identify a logged in user. Okay, then if we have some error, we can say catch error, and we can say set user to be null, because we're gonna set errors inside login page and inside register page. But here we will say that user will be null. And then finally, we need to have a state where we want to say that loading will be false. So let's say finally, loading will be false. So let's call this function here. And when it comes to the dependency array, it should be empty. It means that if we have empty dependency array, it means that it will run only once when the component mounts. Okay. Then if loading is true, we can return this div with this text. Okay. So let's save this file. And as you see, we have loading and now it is gone. Okay. That is great. But you can already say that our user isn't true because we're not logged in, right? We're not logged in. We need to keep working to implement functionality for that. Okay, now let's work with our login page, because as you remember, in our database, we have some users. So using their credentials, we will be able to log in. Now let's go to login page. We can say /login. And now we are on the login page. Okay, so let's open our login component and let's start working with it. So let's say that we want to have a form. So let's say form, and inside this form, we want to have h2 tag, and we can say login, and then we can have an input. Its type will be text, and for the placeholder, let's say name. Well, actually, it will be email, and type will also be email because we want to be able to log in, right? And let's remove this break line. And since we have our form, let's also create a state for that. Let's say const form will be equal to set form, and it will be equal to use state hook. And let's say that here we want to have email and password. Both will be empty strings. Then we can have a state for error. So let's say const error. And by the way, since we have state for error here, we're gonna have it inside register too. So for now, we can remove this state from here, I believe. Okay, so let's go to login page and keep working here. So let's say that to this input, we want to apply the following styles. Let's say that border, let's say that we want to have border, padding will be 2, width will be full, and margin bottom will be 3. And value will be equal to form.email, and on change, we can get access to this event object, and then we can say set form, and then we want to keep all the data of our form by saying .form, and then we can change only the email. So we say email to be the data of whatever we type. So by writing 3 dots and form, we do object spreading. It means that we want to keep all the fields of the form as they are and change the value only of this field, which is email, and we want to change its value to whatever we type. Okay, then let's just copy this input, do the same for our password. So let's say password and do the same. Okay, so let's save it. And here it is. Great. Then under this input, we can create a button, and let's actually accept it and see what we have. And here it is. Okay, so now when we submit this form, we need to create functionality for that. So let's create a function called handle submit. Then we can prevent the default behavior of a page when it is refreshing, but we don't want to have that. So we want to prevent that. Now let's use try and catch block. And if we have some error, we can say login failed, or we can say invalid credentials, or we can say invalid email or password. Then inside try block, let's say that we want to have a response, which will be equal to await Axios. Let's import Axios.post method. Then we provide our full path. Later, we're gonna remove this part, but for now, it will be like this. Then we provide our path, then the endpoint will be login, and we provide form data. Then ideally, we need to say that we want to take set user and pass it to our login component. Okay, so let's save it. And now inside login.js, we need to get access to it. And then we need to say that after the response, we want to set user to be the data of this response. Okay, and then after a user logs in, we want to navigate him to the home page. For that, we can create a variable called navigate, which will be equal to useNavigate function, which comes from React Router DOM. So if a user manages to log in, we can use this function and navigate him to the home page. Okay, so now let's just apply some styles to it. Then we will try to log in using the credentials of some of our users in our database. So to this form, let's say that background color will be white, padding will be 6, it will be rounded, and we can have some shadow, which will be medium. Then to H2, let's say that text will be XL and margin bottom will be 4. Then if we have some error, we also need to show it. So let's say that we will apply it. So let's save it. And here it is. And we want to have it in the center. So to this div, let's say that it will be min height will be screen, display will be flex, items will be center, justify will be center, and let's remove this background color. So let's save it. And here it is. Okay, now we can go to our index.css and to our body, we can apply this background color. As you can see, the background color is gray. Now let's try to log in as Oliver. So let's provide his credentials and let's click this button. As you can see, we have invalid email or password. Well, as you can see here, I have localhost. It means that I have an error here. I need to write L. So let's save it. Okay, let's close it. Now let's refresh the page. And now let's try to log in as Mark. I guess that at some point I provided the wrong credentials. Okay, now let's try to click login. And as you can see, now we're on the home page. Well, I think that first of all, of course, we had this error because I forgot to write this letter. And then I think that I forgot to write the right password. I think that I just copied the name of a user and pasted it. I really provided the wrong credentials. The reason I provided the wrong credentials is because I provided the right email, but when it came to password, I just copied the name of the user, but I had to write that password, which was 123456 in our case, as you remember. So that's why we had that error. And this time I provided mark@gmail.com and his password, which is 123456 and 6. Okay, so now everything is correct. And as you can see, we managed to log in as Mark. Now let's work with register page. So when it comes to the register page, we can just copy the content of login.jsx, then open register page, and let's just paste everything here and change it back to be register. Okay, and here it has to be register as well. Here it has to be register as well. And here we need to have one more field for the name. Okay, so now let's go to the register page. Now let's save this file. Okay, now we need to create one more input field for our registering. So type will be text, placeholder will be name, then value will be name, and here we also need to have name. Then here we need to have register. So let's save it. Great. So now we can register from here. So let's try to do it. So let's say Harry and provide his email. And again, the password will be 123456 and 6. So let's click register. And we have invalid email or password, but we forgot to change this error. Okay, so we need to say that it will be registration failed. So let's save it and let's click one more time. And now we have registration failed. Okay, so let's try to find out why. So it says that the server responded with a status of 400 bad request. Okay, well guys, as you can see, here we have set user function, but from app.jsx we don't pass it. So we need to make sure that we pass it. So let's save it. And now we can get access to it. Okay. So now let's refresh the page. And now let's provide name. So let's say Ronald, then email, and password. Let's click register. And as you can see, we managed to register our user. So let's see it inside pgAdmin. So let's click execute script. And as you can see, now we have both Harry and Ronald. That is great, guys. So now let's work with our navbar component. So let's go to our navbar and start working with it. So let's say that here we want to use nav tag instead of div. So let's say that here we want to apply the following styles. Let's say that background color will be gray 800, padding will be 4, text will be white, and then here we want to have a link component which comes to us from React Router DOM. And instead of this text, let's say PERN auth. So when we click it, it will redirect us to the home page. It will be a link to the home page. And for the class name, let's say that font will be bold. So let's save it. Okay, here it is. As you can see, I can click it. Then under this link, let's say that we want to have a div, and then based on if there is a user, so if user is true, we need to do something here. If user isn't true, we need to do something here. And we need to pass the user state from app.j6 to our navbar component. So let's do it. So let's say user will be equal to user, and then set user function, we also need to pass it, will be equal to set user. So let's save it. Now we can get access to it. So let's say user and set user. Okay. So if user is true, we want to display a button to be able to log out. So let's say that we want to have a button to be able to log out. But if user isn't true, we want to have a link to be able to log in. So let's say that it will lead to the login page. And here let's say login. And the same should be done for the register. Okay. And let's have them inside of a fragment to get rid of that error. Great. And to both of these, let's say that margin horizontally will be 2. So we will have some space. Okay. So let's save it. And as you can see, we have this logout button. It means that our user is true. And yes, it is really true because we are signed in. After we registered a user, we are signed in and we are still signed in. And now even if I refresh the page, as you can see, we are still signed in. Okay. Now let's say that we want to say flex, justify to be between, and items to be center. So let's save it. Great. So now let's say that to this button we want to apply the following styles. Background color will be red 500, padding horizontally will be 3, and vertically it will be 1, and this button will be rounded. Now we need to implement functionality so that when a person clicks this button, they will be logged out. So let's create a function for that. Let's say const handle logout, and we need to import, let's import Axios from Axios. Oops, let's say await Axios.post. Then we need to provide our path and the correct endpoint. So after we click this button, user should be null, and then we want to navigate him to the home page. For that, let's say that we want to have navigate, which will be equal to use navigate function, which comes from React Router DOM. And now let's navigate him to the home page. Okay, so let's save this file. And now if I click logout, of course, I will be on the home page, but this button should be gone and I should see these two buttons. So let's click logout, and looks like we have, well, of course, I didn't use it right. So when I click, let's find it. So when I click this button, so let's say on click, I want to call this function. Okay. So now let's click logout. And now, as you can see, we have these buttons. Now, if I refresh the page, everything will stay the same. As you can see, because we handled it on our backend. So now let's try to click login. And from here, we can login. If we click register, we can register. Now let's click this link. And now we're on the home page. So let's go to the login page again. And as you can see here, we have this scroll, but I don't want to see that. So instead of min height screen, I will say min height to be 80 ph. So let's save it and it is gone. And the same will be done to register. Okay, now let's work with our home page. So let's open it. Okay, so let's say that inside of this div, we want to have one more div, and inside we can actually have a place for the error. And it means that inside app.j6, anyway, we need to have a state for our error. Okay, so let's say error. So let's save it. And we need to pass it to our home component. So let's say error to be error. And also we need to pass the state of a user to this component. So let's get access to user and error. So if there is an error, we can just accept it. And then if user is true, so let's say if user is true, we want to do something here. And if user isn't true, we also want to do something here. So if user is true, we can welcome him, right? We can say welcome user.name. And if user isn't true, for now we can say please login or register. So let's say that we want to wrap it inside of a div, and let's actually use h2 tag and h2 here as well. So we have our div, we say welcome user.name, and let's say that font will be bold, margin bottom will be 4, text will be small, and text color will be gray 800. Great. Then we also want to show the user's email. So let's say we want to have a paragraph, and here let's say email will be equal to user.email. And let's say that the color will be gray 600. So let's save it for now. And as you can see, we have please login or register. Now let's go to the login page and let's try to log in as Ronald. Then his password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Let's click login. And as you can see, we don't see anything. But after refreshing the page, we finally see his data. But we're gonna deal with it very soon. Of course, we don't want to have this experience. We want to see his data as soon as we are on this page. We're gonna deal with it very soon. Okay, and for now, let's keep working here. And we're gonna deal with this behavior very soon. So if we are not logged in, let's say that here we want to have a div, and here let's say please log in or register. Then after this h2, we can have a div where we will have links to be able to log in or register. So let's say that here we want to have a link which comes from React Router DOM, and it will lead to the login page. And let's apply some styles to it. Let's say that width will be full, text will be white, background color will be blue 500, then padding will be 3, rounded will be medium, and on hover, background color will be blue 600, and font will be medium. Okay, and when it comes to the register page, let's first of all create a link for that register. So let's say register, and here we forgot to say login, and here let's say register. So when it comes to this register, we just want to change the colors. So let's say that it will be gray 200, and on hover it will be gray 300. So let's save it, and we don't see it. So let's first of all log out. And here it is. So to this h2, let's say that font will be bold, margin bottom will be 6, text color will be gray 800. Then to this div, let's say that min height will be 80 vh, it will be flex, items will be center, justify will be center, and padding will be 4. Okay, and here text color will be gray 800. Great. Then to this div, we can apply the following styles. Let's say that background color will be white, padding will be 8, it will be rounded large, shadow will be medium, width will be full, and max width will be large, and text will be center. So let's save it, and it looks much better. Then to this div, which contains these links, let's say that it will be flex, flex direction will be column, and gap vertically will be 4. Great. Okay, it looks nice. I like it. Let's click login. Let's log in as Ronald and provide password. Okay, as you can see, again, we don't see the data. We need to refresh the page and only now we see this data. So to deal with this problem, as you remember, when we log in, as you can see, we have response.json and we have user object. It means that inside login.j6, we need to pass response.data.user. Okay, so let's save it. So now let's log out. Now let's click login. And now I want to sign in as Harry. So let's say harry@gmail.com and provide his password. And as you can see, we see the data immediately. So again, during this video, we had some minor mistakes, but as you can see, as they sum up, they can lead to some inconvenient situations. Okay, now to make sure that everything is working correctly, let's log out again and let's log in as Ronald again. Let's click login. And as you can see, we immediately see his data. Now, if we refresh the page, as you can see, everything is fine. So for a few seconds, we see that loading, but everything seems to be fine. Okay. And as you remember, guys, I said that this part, we can remove this part to make it reusable. So if we are in production, we will be able to change only this part and we will not need to go to every file and manually change that. So we can do it. For that, inside vite.config.js, we need to make some changes here. So here, let's say that here we want to have a server object, then proxy. So it will be proxy API requests to backend. Then here we want to have API. So let's say /API. And when it comes to target, we want to provide this URL. So whenever we have API, we will have this path in front of it. Okay, so let's save it. And now inside, for example, login.j6, we can remove this part because we already have /API. And it means that in front of it, we will have localhost 5000. We can change it here. Then we can remove it inside register component. And inside app.j6, we can remove it as well. Okay, and to make sure that everything is still working, we can, for example, refresh the page. So let's do it. As you can see, everything is still working. Now, what you think will happen if I try to go to the route which isn't defined? So for example, if I say something like this and press enter, as you can see, we see nothing. So to handle this kind of scenarios, we can do the following. So let's come back to the home page and now we can create a new component called not found. So let's say not found.j6. So let's quickly apply some styles to this component. Then we will use it. So here, let's say that min height will be 80 VH, it will be flex, items will be center, justify will be center, background color will be gray 900, text will be white, and text size will be 2XL. And for the actual text, let's say 404, page not found. So let's save it. And now inside app.j6, we can do the following. We can have catch all route. So under this route, let's say route and path will be this sign. It means that it will be a catch all route. And for the element, we want to use not found component. Okay, so let's save it. Now, if I try to go to something like this, as you can see, we have page not found and the background color is 900, but let's just remove it. Okay, because we already have background color inside index.css. And again, all these styles are up to you. But if we remove it, we don't see it. So it means that we can make the text to be gray 900, for example. Okay, this experience is also good. So let's go to the home page. Great. So now we are logged in. And since I am logged in, we can assume that I shouldn't go to the login page. But if I try to do it, as you can see, without any problems, I can do it. But I want to prevent my users from going to the login page or from going to the register page if they are already logged in. So we can handle it as well. So here, let's come to this element and let's say if user is true. So if user is true, we want to navigate him. So let's say navigate. So let's say navigate to the home page. Okay. So if user is true, we navigate him to the home page. But if not, we just want to show the login page. And the same should be done for the register page. So let's just paste it here. So let's save it. And now I am logged in. If I try to go to the login page, as you can see, I can't do it. Now let's try to log out. Let's try to register. Let's create a new user. So let's say Leonardo and provide his email and password. So let's click register. And as you can see, after we register, again, we don't see the data immediately. I think that it is because of the same problem. So let's try to find out. So if we go here and if we go to the register, as you can see, again, we have user object. It means that after we register, we need to see response.data.user. Okay, so let's save it. And now if I refresh the page, I see Leonardo. Let's log out and create a new user to make sure that everything happens the way we want. So let's say Francesco and provide his email and password. As you can see, now we immediately see the data of this user. And now if we refresh the page, we still see the data of this user. That is great, guys. And then if, for example, you don't want to see this loading and this white screen, you can come to this div and say that background color will be gray, for example, 900 or 800. And you can say that min height will be screen. So let's save it. And now the experience will be a bit different. Okay. But again, everything is up to you. You can say that text color will be white or something else, but I will make it to be as it was. So I will remove this class. So let's save it. Now let's just refresh the page again. Okay. Okay, guys. And also I noticed that our forms are of different sizes. So to make them look better, we can do the following. Let's come to this register. And when it comes to this form, let's say that width will be full and max width will be large. And the same should be done to the login page. But now let's save it and do the same here. So let's save it and see it. Okay, now it looks much better. Great. And also we can add some paddings to them. Let's say that here padding will be 4 and here padding will be 4 as well. Okay. And here we can also remove this URL because we have it inside our vite.config.js file. So let's save it. Also, as you can see, our navbar is still going maximum to the left and also to the right, but we don't want to have this experience. So to fix this, we can do the following. So first of all, let's say that background color will be gray and text will be white, of course, but let's remove this padding for now. And also we can remove these styles. Then we can take these data and we can have a div, and to this div we can apply the following styles. Let's say that max width will be 6XL, then margin horizontally will be auto, then padding horizontally will be 4, vertically it will be 3, or we can just say that padding in general will be 4, it will be flex, justify will be between, and items will be center. So let's save it and see what we have. So as you can see, now it is much better. It looks much better like we want. Okay, that is great, guys. Okay, the last but not least, we can also make this login text to look much better. So first of all, let's say that text will be 2XL, margin bottom will be 6, then font will be bold, text will be center, and text color will be gray 800. So let's save it, and now it looks much better. And the same we can apply to the register form. So let's do it. Okay, that's it. And now let's go to pgAdmin to see our users. Now, if we execute this script again, let's see what will happen. as you can see, we have 6 users. That is really great, guys. So that's it, guys. If you find this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel if you haven't done it yet. Thank you. I really appreciate it.